Okay, so today we'll be discussing about bile duct injuries and congenital anomalies of biliary tract. So the bile duct injuries we most commonly encounter after laparoscopic cholecystectomy. That means 98% of bile duct injuries are seen they are cases of laparoscopic cholecystectomy, and there are few cases for example, we are doing gastrectomy, pancreatectomy, and peptic ulcer surgery. In that case also, and the trauma is also a rare cause of bile duct injury, especially penetrating trauma, stab injury, abdomen. So usually we encounter most of the cases are of laparoscopic cholecystectomy. So it can be recognized intraoperatively or during the early post-operative period. So the important thing is it should be appropriately managed, because if it is not appropriately managed, then it will lead to long-term consequences, which can be recurrent cholangitis, biliary cirrhosis, and portal hypertension. So the incidence after cholecystectomy. So it is 0.1 to 0.2 during an open cholecystectomy, and it's 0.85% during a laparoscopic cholecystectomy. Earlier the incidence was more when the laparoscopy was started. So at that time there were not high definition cameras, and the instruments also were not that good. So in that cases there are more incidence of injury in laparoscopic cholecystectomy. But nowadays with the advanced learning and high definition cameras, there are very less chances of injury. So there is a learning curve for a surgeon. So in the first 20 cases, there are more chances of injury to the bile duct. So one should be cautious during the first 20 cases. He or she should do under the supervision of a expert laparoscopic surgeon. So the other factors are responsible apart from that are acute and chronic inflammation. So whenever we are doing for acute and chronic cholecystitis, and where there is so much adhesions, there are chances of injury. Especially as I talked in acute cholecystitis, the first 72 years are the first 72 hours are the golden period for doing the surgery. But after 72 hours, there is formation of adhesions, and then the Calot's triangle freezes. So that's why. So it is important to do in cases of acute cholecystitis before 72 hours. And then obesity. In obesity, there is a lot of peritoneal fat is there, lot of fat in the Calot's triangle, and there is possibility of bleeding. So obesity is another reason. Then the anatomical variations are there. So one should be knowing about the anatomical variations of the biliary tract. And sometimes when there is bleeding, there is panic application of clips. So in that time also there is more chance of injury. So whenever there is bleeding, we should be patient. First of all, we should apply compression, and even if there is bleeding, so that there is a problem of visibility, then we can convert to the open cholecystectomy. So the initial learning curve, first 20 cases are important. So coming to the presentation, so there are three times at which we can diagnose a bile duct injury. Now one is intraoperatively. So when during surgery we find that there is leakage from the bile duct, there is bile leakage, and when you do cholangiogram, the cholangiogram comes out to be abnormal. And sometimes after we do some clipping, then we come to know that we have clipped the wrong duct or wrong structure. So at that time there is late recognition of anatomy. So in these circumstances, intraoperative presentation is there. Then suppose we miss bile duct injury in the intra-op period. So the patient may manifest in the post-operative period. So in the post-operative period, what will you see? There may be leakage from the port sides. There may be leakage, bile leakage from the drain side. The patient may be having, after 2-3 days, the patient may develop severe tenderness in the abdomen. There may be sepsis, fever, post-operative jaundice if they will be there if we club the common hepatic duct or common bile duct. So this is the early post-operative presentation. Now sometimes the patient get discharged, and when there is not complete transaction, at that time the patient may present in months or years with the presentation of acute cholangitis, acute and chronic cholangitis, then biliary cirrhosis and portal hypertension. So, how will you manage this say bile duct injury?
हाँ सर. ओके. नहीं, म्यूट पे नहीं है. ठीक है, कर दिया.
Welcome and thank you for choosing freeconferencecall.com. You're helping people around the world communicate
Hello?
for free.
Hello?
There are 134 participants in the
हेलो.
conference.
हो गया सर, ऑडियो ऑन हो गया. ठीक.
So I think there was a problem of audio. So we'll discuss the last slide once again. So presentation. So the presentation can be intraoperatively, early post-operative period, or after months or years after surgery. So intraoperatively, when there is bile leakage during surgery, we identify, or whenever we do a cholangiogram and we find that the cholangiogram is abnormal, or sometimes after ligating a structure, we come to know that it's not cystic duct, it's a common hepatic duct or a right hepatic duct. At that time, we may encounter a bile duct injury. So if the intraoperative diagnosis cannot be made, then it's possible that in early postoperative period, the patient may present with leakage of the bile from the drain site or from the wound site. If there is collection of bile, the patient may present with severe tenderness in the upper abdomen. The patient may be having signs of sepsis, fever, and postoperative jaundice if there is clipping of the main bile duct. And sometimes there is very late presentation, even months to years after surgery, when the patient comes with the complications such as bile duct biliary cirrhosis, portal hypertension, and cholangitis. So the diagnosis and management depends upon the timing of the diagnosis and extent and level of injury. So I said the timing of is very important. So first of all, let's discuss the classification of bile duct injury. So type A is when there is small leakage from the cystic duct or from the liver bed. Type B is when there is partial occlusion of biliary tree, mostly right hepatic duct. Type C is bile leak from the aberrant right hepatic duct. Type D is when there is lateral injury to the bile duct without loss of continuity. And type A is when there is circumferential injury, that means loss of continuity is there. So this is the pictorial diagram of bile duct injury. So there is a class type A injury. In type A injury, you can see there is a leakage from the cystic duct, or there is a leakage from the minor hepatic ducts. In type B, there is occlusion of aberrant right hepatic duct. In type C, there is injury to the right hepatic aberrant right hepatic duct with biliary leakage. And in type C, there is partial injury to the main duct. That means there is not circumferential injury. Only less than 50% of the duct is involved. And this is type E, in which there is complete transaction of the common bile duct. So the type E is also divided into the type E1, 2, 3 and 4, depending upon the site at which the bile duct is transected. So the more distal the bile duct is transected, the more amount of the common bile duct we have for anastomosis. So in E1, the distal part is transected, so we have lot of 2 centimeters of common hepatic duct is there. In E2, the confluence is involved, the right and left. So in this case, we have only a small portion of the common hepatic duct. And in E3, we can see the right and left hepatic duct both are transected. So then we have to anastomose each duct, right and left duct, independently with the loop of jejunum. So these are the different types of injury. So depending upon the timing when we recognize the injury. So suppose we recognize the injury during the surgery only. So if it is a minor injury, that means there is small leakage from the cystic duct, or there is a small rent in the common bile duct, which is not involving the complete circumference. So in that case, it can be managed by putting a T-tube drainage. So we put a T-tube inside the common bile duct and drain the bile, and gradually that tract epithelializes and the injury heals. So minor injury is when there is less than 50% of involvement. And if there is more than 50% of involvement, that means the bile duct may be nearly completely transected or clipped. In that case, we have to do end-to-side choledochojejunostomy. That means a loop of jejunum is taken towards the bile duct, and the bile duct is anastomosed to the loop of jejunum. In that case, we do choledochojejunostomy. When there is complete transection, we do end-to-side choledochojejunostomy. So we do not repair the bile duct. Suppose there is transection, we do not repair the bile duct, primary repair, because there is more chance of ischemia and later on stricture developing in the common bile duct. So that's why the best operation is choledochojejunostomy. So this is a T-tube. This is T-shaped. So this part, horizontal part, is put inside the common bile duct, and the long part is taken out through the skin and for drainage purpose. So this acts as a stent around which the healing occurs, and after that it can be removed after 6 weeks. And again, we can do a T-tube cholangiogram also. We can put a radio-opaque dye and see the continuity of the bile duct, or if there is any other injury. And suppose the very small duct is injured, very small hepatic duct, isolated sectorial duct is in less than 3 mm size is duct. So it can be ligated safely. But if the duct size is more than 3 mm, then there is possibility then that it is draining more than one segment of the liver. So in that case, it should be implanted to the bile duct. So another important thing is bile duct surgery is not very commonly done surgery. So it needs expertise to do such type of surgery. So most of the times the surgeon is not well acquainted with the bile duct surgery, biliary surgery, hepatobiliary surgery. At that time, if the proper facility is not available, then the best thing is to put a drain and then refer the patient to the higher centers where the facility is available. Or if there is facility of some expert surgeon, colleague whom the surgeon can call, that is possible, then they can do surgery. So if the expertise is not available, then just putting a drain and referral to the higher center is needed. Now the injury recognized after cholecystectomy. So what are the presentation? The patient will present. Patient will not be normally after laparoscopic cholecystectomy. Patient is fit on second day, and the patient is able to move. There is no fever. The patient is able to eat properly. So whenever the patient is not doing well after surgery, means the patient will complain of pain. Patient may be having fever, jaundice. He will be having high pulse rate. So in that cases, we should suspect a bile duct injury. So there will be drainage from the drainage of bile from the drain. Patient may be present with jaundice, abdominal pain. There may be signs of sepsis, and on investigation in USG, you can find a collection of bile in the right hypochondrium. And when we do cholangiography, we can identify the nature of the injury. Now coming to the management post-op bile leak injuries. So first of all, the patient is not able to eat. Patient is dehydrated, having electrolyte imbalance. The patient is having septicemia. In such cases, first of all, we should hydrate the patient to give IV fluids. Then we give parenteral broad spectrum antibiotics. Then if there is collection of bile inside the abdomen, we should drain that bile by USG guided drainage, percutaneous drainage. Then we order ERCP, endoscopic retrograde cholangiography. So endoscopic retrograde cholangiography can be only possible if there is patency of the bile duct. That means there is less than 50% of injury. In that case, the endoscope, bile duct can be cannulated and stent can be placed. But if there is complete cutoff, the bile duct will not be able to cannulate. So that time stenting drainage via ERCP is not possible. So the other cholangiogram is percutaneous transhepatic cholangiography. So this is done when there is complete cutoff of the bile duct. So we put a drain subcutaneously through the liver parenchyma into the biliary channels so that we can drain the bile. So that patient jaundice will decrease. So definitive management. So usually the definitive in the post-operative period, definitive management is deferred for 6 weeks because after 3-4 days there is so much inflammation that it's not possible to anastomose the bile duct with the jejunum. So in that case there is high chances of failure of surgery. So after the inflammation is subsided, then only we do surgery. Coming to the principles of biliary surgery, what we should do after 6 weeks. So we should use the proximal bile duct with least inflammation, and we should do tension-free anastomosis with a loop of jejunum, Roux-en-Y loop of jejunum, and there should be direct mucosa to mucosa anastomosis. So this is a Roux-en-Y. This is called as a Roux limb. We cut this jejunum just around 1 feet distal to the duodenojejunal junction, and then we take out this loop and anastomose to the common hepatic duct, and this loop is anastomosed to the rural loop of the jejunum. So what will happen? This food material will go directly through this part, so there will be no reflux of fluid to the upper part, and this rural limb drains the common bile duct. So this is tension-free anastomosis. Suppose we when there is a gap and we anastomose directly the distal and proximal end, there is more chances of leakage and post-operative stricture. So that's why biliary enteric anastomosis is preferred. Coming to the interventional radiologic and endoscopic techniques. So ERCP and PTC. So they are useful for bile duct injury, leak and strictures. We can do a percutaneous drainage, USG guided. We can do a cholangiograph and identify the duct anatomy. And if there is a stricture, we can put a stent, and we can do a stricture dilatation also. There are some complications as discussed earlier: hemophilia, cholangitis and bile leak. Then ERCP and stenting is done for small cystic duct leakage or small CVD leakage when there is continuity of the bile duct. Then we can do non-operative measures like ERCP and putting a stent. Then sometimes when there is stricture, we can do a dilatation through ERCP. So this is a picture of ERCP done, and a stent is placed in the CBD. So this stent is negotiated beyond the cystic duct. As you can see, there is a slippage of the clip of the cystic duct, and there is the leakage of bile. So by putting a stent, we keep the passage of this bile duct open, and gradually this leak subsides. Now the outcomes. So outcomes is good. 90% of patients are free from jaundice and cholangitis, and the best result is obtained when the injury is recognized during the surgery, and post-op injury should be repaired once the inflammation is subsided. The complications after the biliary repair can be managed non-operatively. The complications are recurrent cholangitis, hemophilia, bile leakage, external biliary fistula and restenosis. Coming to the next topic is the congenital anomalies of the biliary tract. So number one is biliary atresia. So as you know, atresia is complete obliteration of the duct. So in biliary atresia, there is progressive obliteration of both extra and intrahepatic bile ducts. So the cause is not known. It occurs in 1 in 15,000 childbirth, and there is no medical therapy to reverse the obliterative process. And if there is no treatment, then biliary cirrhosis later on, due to the biliary obstruction, obstructive jaundice, the patient will end up in the biliary cirrhosis, and later on portal hypertension, and death can follow within 2 years. So the pathology of atresia, there is bile duct proliferation, and there is cholestasis with plugging of the lumen by the inflammatory cell infiltrate, and later on there will be fibrosis and end stage liver disease. So there are 3 variants of biliary atresia. Number 1 is proximal part is patent and distal part is atretic. Number 2 is proximal part is fibrosis and distal part is patent. And number 3, when the both proximal and distal part are fibrotic. So the proximal patency is only present in 5% of cases. So these are the types of biliary atresia. So the type 1, in this you can see there is a line. This is the atretic bile duct, that is stenosed obliterated distal bile duct. So this one is relatively correctable procedure. As we can see, there is a proximal bile duct is present, so it can be anastomosed to the jejunum. In the type 2A, the proximal part is stenosed or obliterated, and the distal part is patent. In type 2B, again the proximal distal part goes up to the common hepatic duct, and only the hilar confluence is patent. Then there is the type 3, that is most severe type of biliary atresia, in which both the intrahepatic and extrahepatic biliary ducts are obliterated. So this is a candidate for liver transplantation. So how do you diagnose the patient? So first of all, neonatal, the other causes of neonatal jaundice should be excluded. So there are multiple causes of neonatal jaundice. For example, first of all, there is a physiological jaundice which occurs after 1 day and usually subsides within 14 days. And then there are hereditary spherocytosis, thalassemia when there is increased breakdown of the RBC. Then there are genetic problems such as Dubin-Johnson's, Rotter syndrome, Crigler-Najjar syndrome. So all these causes, other causes of jaundice should be ruled out. So the direct bilirubin is raised in cholestasis. So when the direct bilirubin is more than 2 milligrams per deciliter, then there is cholestatic jaundice, or when it is 20% of the total bilirubin level. So early recognition is very important in biliary atresia, as when there is delayed diagnosis, there is worse prognosis. So within 60 days, if the diagnosis is done, then we can do a surgical correction. So other causes of cholestasis should be ruled out. We should do alpha-1 antitrypsin level for alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency. Then IgM level should be done to see if there is any viral infection, CMV, herpes, and hepatitis B. Then thyroid function test to see if there is hypothyroidism. Then sweat chloride test for cystic fibrosis. Coming to the imaging investigations and liver biopsy. The imaging investigation in ultrasound, you will find the gallbladder is shrunken and the hepatic duct, extrahepatic biliary tree is not recognized, visualized. Then for the confirmation or diagnosis, you have to do liver biopsy. So in liver biopsy, we can find inflammatory and fibrotic cells and obliteration of bile ductules. Then there is hepatobiliary scintigraphy, that is HIDA scan, in which the functioning of the biliary tract is assessed. So when there is normal hepatic uptake, but there is absent excretion into the intestine, then we come to know that there is atresia of the bile duct. Now the surgical management of biliary atresias. So once the diagnosis is confirmed, we have to go for exploratory laparotomy. And in exploratory laparotomy, we confirm the findings, then that the bile duct is fibrotic. So we have to do first of all cholangiogram by putting dye in the gallbladder, and then we see if the dye is going to the distal tract. So if it is complete, so we have to find out the level of obliteration, whether the proximal and distal duct is obliterated or only the distal duct is obliterated. Then all the fibrotic segment of the bile duct is excised, and the loop of jejunum is directly anastomosed to the portal triad, to the hepatic sinusoids. So the classic procedure is known as Kasai's procedure. So in this, there is excision. We do excision of the fibrotic biliary tract up to the liver capsule with Roux-en-Y hepatico-jejunostomy. For post-operative management, we have to give bile salts such as chenodeoxycholic acid to increase the flow of bile. Then steroids are given and antimicrobial prophylaxis is given long term. So this is Kasai's procedure. It is also called hepaticoportoenterostomy. So as there is the bile duct confluence is also obliterated, and only the hepatic sinusoids are remaining. So this loop of intestine is directly attached to the undersurface of the liver, so that it can directly drain the hepatic sinusoids. So this is again a Roux and Weiss surgery. So this is the most common surgeries performed for the biliary tract disease. So the outcome is good if the patient is operated within 2 months. But afterwards afterward diagnosis, then poor results. Sometimes when there is intrahepatic biliary obstruction also, then we have to go for liver transplantation. Or when there is failure of surgery, then again we have to do liver transplantation. So by now the biliary atresia is the most common condition for pediatric liver transplantation. Coming to the next anomaly is choledochal cyst. So choledochal cyst means there is cystic enlargement of the common bile duct. So it usually presents in childhood, but sometimes it may present in the adulthood also. So the incidence is more common in females, and there can be isolated or there may be multiple dilatations of the extra and intrahepatic duct. So coming to the pathogenesis, so what is the reason of the cystic dilatation of the duct? So most probable theory is when there is anomalous pancreatic duct biliary duct junction. Normally the pancreatic duct and biliary duct join and open into the ampulla of Vater. So when the pancreatic duct joins very high up into the biliary tract, there is a long common channel. So when there is long common channel, the pancreatic juice refluxes to the proximal bile duct, and there is inflammation of the mucosa and the weakening of the bile duct wall. So this leads to the cyst formation. So there are 5 types. It's classified into 5 types by the Trodanese modification of Valenzuela's classification. You can just remember the Trodanese classification of the choledochal cyst. So this is the classification types of choledochal cyst. So type 1, when there is saccular dilatation of the cystic common bile duct. So there is circumferential dilatation of the common bile duct. Type 2, when there is diverticulum in the common bile duct. You can see this diverticulum which is rising from the side of the side wall. Type 3, when there is cyst in the ampulla of the ampullary region of the bile duct. So as you can see, this is the ampullary region, it is dilated. Then type 4, when there is multiple saccular dilatations of both intra and extra hepatic duct. And type 5, when there is dilatation, saccular dilatation of only the intrahepatic ducts. So this type 1 is most common. Commonly, it is seen in more than 50% of choledochal cysts. So clinical presentation. There is classic triad. That is, patient will present with right upper quadrant pain, jaundice, and abdominal mass due to the cyst. So this classical triad is seen in only 10% of patients. So either the patient may present with abdominal mass, or the patient may be present with jaundice or pain. So two of the characters may be present. So all the three characters are present only in 10% of patients. So then the sequelae may be due to the dilatation of cystic duct, the dilatation of the bile duct, choledochal cyst. The cyst may compress to the portal vein. So if there is compression of portal vein, there will be portal hypertension, and secondary biliary cirrhosis may be there. Then due to the stasis of the bile, there can be sludge formation and stone formation. Then coming to the investigations, then laboratory investigation, the LFT is raised, usually more than 60% of patients. The liver function test is raised, but sometimes it may not be raised also. Then imaging studies, ultrasound and CT scan of abdomen. Then cholangiography for delineation of the anatomy and planning of the treatment. The ERCP, you can see the abnormal pancreatic duct biliary duct junction, the abnormally long pancreatic common channel. Then percutaneous transhepatic cholangiography, we can see the intrahepatic segment also. So intrahepatic biliary dilatations can be seen in PTC. So the management. So what is the goal of management? Number one is to relieve the symptoms. So for example, the patient may be present with abdominal mass, pain, jaundice. So number one is relief of symptoms, and number two is prevention of complications. So what are the complications of this choledochal cyst? Well, it can lead to cholangitis due to the portal vein obstruction. It can lead to portal hypertension, and later on biliary cirrhosis. And there is chances of carcinoma of the bile duct, cholangiocarcinoma or gallbladder cancer. So there is 2.5 to 26% of chances of developing a cancer in choledochal cyst. So normally it is very much less than 1% chances of developing a cancer in the normal bile duct. So when there is choledochal cyst, there is very high chances, up to 25%, 26% of chances of developing into malignancy. So that's why we need to remove whole of the cyst along with the whole of the cyst. So coming to the operative procedures, earlier this was done choledochocystojejunostomy. That means the cyst was anastomosed to the loop of intestine, for example duodenum or jejunum, so that there will be biliary drainage from the cyst. But nowadays this surgery is not performed. Why? Because there is recurrent chances of bile duct stasis, and we leave the cyst inside the abdomen, inside, and there is a high chances of malignancy in the cyst. So that's why complete resection of the cyst and anastomosis of the remaining bile duct with the jejunum is the procedure of choice. That is Roux-en-Y hepaticojejunostomy. Suppose there are intrahepatic cyst, so suppose only one lobe of liver is involved, so we can do a partial hepatectomy also. We can remove one lobe of liver and then anastomose the remaining left or right hepatic duct with the jejunum. And when there is generalized involvement of the hepatic duct, intrahepatic duct, so then there is only chance the patient may land into the hepatic failure. Then liver transplantation is the only choice in such cases. So that completes the choledochal cyst, the congenital anomalies, and the biliary tract injuries. In the next topic, we'll study the gallbladder cancers and the biliary tract cancers, cholangiocarcinoma. Thank you.